Managers of Reddit. What was an excuse an employee gave that you thought was bullcrap till you saw proof? A guy in my public speaking class stopped showing up for about a month. Suddenly he reappears and says he got jumped and was beat 6 times, and that's why he missed class. 6 times? He pulled up his shirt to show the group of people who had huddled to hear the story. It looked like a grenade had gone off, with how fast the huddle of people torqued their bodies away from the site. Yeah, 6 times. Story 2. One of my colleagues said he would be late because of heavy rains. It turned out that he was living in a flood-prone zone, and he showed up to office, shirtless because it was wet and soiled by muddy water, with a video of his car floating and totaled on the road near his house. Story 3. I jumped up, hit my head on the low ceiling, and had to go to the hospital. He showed me the stitches. Story 4. Guy I knew lost his big toe on a building site. Someone knocked over one of those large concrete slabs things they have. He was ringing his boss, who didn't believe him, so has asked the ambulance driver to turn on the siren. Story 5. Almost all the women on my team came to me because another came to work in a beige miniskirt that was transparent enough to show her black underwear, which was against the company dress code. I get her out and tell her we can't have her showing that much, and that she had to fix it before coming back. She came back 2 minutes later, a bright smile on her face telling me she had fixed it. She opened her purse before me, showing me her underwear in it. Story 6. I know a guy who said he was kidnapped in the Middle East on vacations. He had the police reports and everything. Why he would go on vacation in the Middle East? He said he was visiting family. Story 7. Not a manager, but actually me. Turns out that the first day after a 3 weeks vacations, I fell off a bus in movement and suffered a lot of injuries on my right foot. My mom went to my job and delivered the medical suspension. After 6 months of recovery, I returned to work. I could barely walk by myself, and it was extremely painful still. First thing that my manager said when he saw me, "Crap, I thought you was bullcrafting with the whole bus story, just to extend your vacation." Crap, man, I think that a 6-month suspension just to extend my vacations is quite extreme. Story 8. Someone said they got a medical recommendation from the doctor for a sick leave, which legally will be giving them a paid day off for, wait for it, being drunk. Saw the medical chit too drunk and hungover to work. Called up the clinic, drove all the way to check out if the thing exists. Bravo, bravo. Story 9. When I managed a convenience store, a guy who was there didn't complete all his closing tasks until about 1 a.m. We closed at 11 p.m. It usually only took about 15 minutes. He said it got super busy, and someone had diarrhea in the middle of the store he had to clean up. He was known in the past for being lazy and finishing his job and milking his time to get more hours in. So I really thought he was just saying stuff as an excuse. Went back and watched the recording from the night before to be sure before I called him out though, and I'm glad I did. You could clearly see about 20 people come about 10 minutes before closing. A dance or something in town was coming to an end, and one guy was leaving a stream of liquid poo around the store before running to the bathroom to try and clean himself up. Story 10. I shat myself on the train on the way in. I'm having to waddle home to shower and change. I'll be about an hour late. I didn't want to see the proof for that one. Story 11. Not the manager, but the employee. I had requested my birthday off months in advance, but it wasn't approved, so I just sucked it up and canceled my plans. About a week before my birthday, a friend of mine passed in a car accident, and their funeral was scheduled on my birthday. As soon as I knew, I told my manager what happened and that I would not be coming in. She scoffed and told me that I was just trying to get out of work for my birthday. The funeral existing wasn't enough. I had to prove that I actually went. This particular manager just did not believe me. I was a teenager, and I guess it was too coincidental for her. I brought her the memorial cards and showed her a picture of me, with a group of others in front of the funeral home. She still didn't really believe me. I thankfully have not worked for that company in a long time. Really love my job now. Story 12 was a manager at BK. Kid called in and said he had a bad reaction to some bath salts. I thought he meant actual bath salts, not the substances bath salts. I've bought some of the essential oil salts for the wife, and some have made her irritated, so I ran with it. He definitely meant the substances bath salts, because I caught him a week or so later busting out a line in the restaurant bathroom. Dude had a small mason jar full, fired on the spot. His excuse was it was legal and didn't think it would be an issue. Story 13. A frequent absentee rushed into my office without knocking, saying he had to go home immediately because of not feeling well. This guy had used so many alibis to skip work. Even his workmates didn't trust him anymore. I stalled, taking note of his abysmal work record, bright eyes and healthy-looking ruddy cheeks, and then decided to give him a stern lecture on workplace absenteeism until he projectile vomited all over my desk, family photos, budget reports, and an open laptop. Trying to avoid the tsunami, I launched my chair backwards, smacking my head on a bookshelf. Through the stars, I could see chunky bits and stinking slime everywhere. I can only conclude it must have been a cold pizza breakfast with a liter of cola. I know some fakers can do that on demand, but I didn't bother to investigate. I suddenly had more pressing problems. Plus, I guess wide eyes and a ruddy complexion can be a bad sign too. Story 14. One of my team was off for a week holiday, called up to say he'd fallen off a bed and broken his neck. Yup, neck brace. Several weeks off work, rehabilitation. Remarkable how he was able to recover so quickly. Story 15. Very loosely qualifies, but once I had to write a request to resit a uni midterm exam because a volcano erupted and grounded all the planes in Europe. I was out of the country at the time. Story 16. Not manager, but guy misses payment on his mortgage. Claims to have been kidnapped for X months. Being risk-based, peeps. We were all skeptical till we saw the police report. Story 17. Had a staff member say she'd been in a car accident and couldn't work. We literally have this excuse every other week from our staff. I was not impressed. Turns out she was riding her bike to work and was hit by a car. She ended up in the ICU and the hospital called us as we were her next of kin. She ended up having a lot of surgery, but recovered within a few months. I paid her a few weeks of pay, so she didn't go too broke. She was a casual and not entitled to pay, until she got back on her feet. So, on at least one occasion, a car accident has been true. Story 18. I was temporarily fired for not showing up to work for a couple of days. I had been called up for jury duty and was selected for a court case, so I filled out a time-off request form and faxed it to my supervisor to approve. When I got to the office after finishing jury duty, walked into my boss's office brandishing 1. My jury summons, 2. The original time-off request form and the fax sheet, and 3. Paperwork from the court to prove I had reported for duty and served. He called my supervisor into his office and asked her about the time-off request form. Turns out my idiot supervisor not only forgot to hand the form in, but for the past couple of months, she had been carrying it around with her. Story 19. Had a guy call me 30 minutes before his shift started to tell me he was locked in his house and couldn't get out. When he finally came in, he had a receipt from a locksmith and the old lock, which had to be drilled out. Story 20. My best friend called out of work for what was essentially a bad sunburn once. We were working at a movie theater at the time, and because she wasn't sure if anyone would believe her, she decided to drive up to show the managers. She has a super distinctive body shape, so when I saw her across the lobby, I waved and she sort of waved back. A bit later, she walked over to me and she was completely unrecognizable. Turns out that she actually had mild sun poisoning and her face was so swollen, she looked like a different person. Her doctor wrote her a note because he didn't want her near the hot popcorn poppers or deep fryers. It took her almost a week to look anything like herself again. Best part was she used the super swollen sun poisoning picture of herself on Tinder for the longest time. Story 21. When I was crew, I called in 5 minutes before my opening shift and told them my back threw out and I couldn't move. Next day, I hear all about how bullcrap that was from my general manager. Told them to call my mom, who told them about how she tried to get me onto my stomach so she could ice my back for 30 minutes at 7 in the morning. They had to take her word for it, but still thought it was bullcrap, as they had never thrown their back out. Thought I was exaggerating the pain. Less than a month later, they threw out their back at work and had to be driven home. Story 22. Not a manager, but one of my best friends is a manager. He mentioned how one of his employees tried to get out of work because he had an argument with his mom. Buddy apologized, confused what the hell that meant, and wrote him up. Turned out that employee's mom didn't like employee's new girlfriend, started an argument with him, and when he tried to leave, she beat the crap out of him and got arrested. Story 23. Guy was scheduled to come in for his first day, got a flat tire on the freeway on the way in, called in, manager was cool and told him to take care of it and come in the next day. Next day rolls around and he calls in again, this time because his radiator overheated on the freeway. Even took a picture and texted it to management and HR. Manager, still cool, told him to come in the following Monday to give him time to get his car repaired. New employee is, of course, grateful as hell. Monday rolls around, and my manager gets another call. New guy was on his way and got into a car accident on the freeway. Manager got pissed this time. New guy told him to look out the window since our building was on a hill that overlooked a large stretch of freeway. Sure enough, off in the distance was new guy's car burning merrily away. Story 24. I had an employee call me saying he wouldn't be able to make it to work because he was in jail. HR called the jail, and sure enough, he was charged with possession of a controlled substance and domestic abuse. He didn't work out. Story 25. Really good guy and employee, just was made for working at night. Always late. Eventually gave him an ultimatum. If you are late one more time, I would have to cut him. Literally next morning, I get a video text from him of slow traffic on the interstate, like at 3 miles per hour, out his passenger window. He slowly rolls past a car on fire in the center lane. I just replied, take your time. Bonus, We were both at a party 3 years later, and I'm telling the story again to a bunch of people there, and he pulls out his phone and shows the same video illustrating the excuse. Story 26. Obligatory not manager. I was an employee at a cafe, so I got stung by wasps on my face and looked like a freak. Yeah, whatever. I didn't have her on Snapchat, but I had other employees. She get it about my crafty excuse until one of them showed her the picture. My lips looked like something out of the Jersey Shore. She apologized next shift. Story 27. I work with bus drivers. One of is known for absenteeism on Monday after football, the European one. One day we put an Alco lock on several of our cars, company policy for one of our biggest clients. One of them was his. He calls in declaring he ate bad fruit and his Alco lock gone haywire. Of course, didn't believe him. Next day he came in with a full blood work and stomach report, and a small note and an empty box of anti-alcohol tablets. Turns out he was already sober for a month. Related but not on topic. 6 months in, we asked him to speak up. Pictures of before and after were a shock to many, especially the pictures of his liver and kidneys. Story 28. Not a manager, but a coworker showed up over an hour late because a goose was guarding my car door. He had a video on his phone, a Canadian goose, sitting in his driveway. Every time he'd approach the car, it'd spread its wings, lower its head, and begin charging at him, honking. Hilarious as hell and totally worth the almost 2 hours of solo work. Story 29. Not for work, and it was me, but in college I was in a sorority, and we were required to go to this thing called Work Week, which prepares us for Recruitment Week, which was also required to go to as a member. I had a biopsy done on a tumor in my liver during most of work week, so I had to miss 3 days of it. Then, in the middle of recruitment week, my uncle passed away, so I told them I had to leave and go to the funeral. They fined me $350 for not being at recruitment because they didn't believe me. I showed them the obituary and everything. Still nothing. I quit that sorority shortly after that. Story 30. I was the employee. I was at a client site doing some work when the building caught on fire. Called my boss, and it went like this. Hey, it's going to be a lot longer. Then we thought the building is on fire. No, as in literal fire. It's not the firewall. We haven't installed it yet. Like literal fire with flames and heat and things. I'm just going to send you a picture. Story 31. Twice happened to me. First time I was an idiot and went tubing down a river without putting sunscreen on the bottom half of my legs. I was burned bad. I called in sick because I could not even put pants on. A coworker, the only other person who does my job, had to work a double and was pissed. I come in the next day in shorts and flip-flops. Totally not the dress code, but all I could wear comfortably. She said, "Holy crap, that is bad. You were not lying. Do you want to go home?" Second, I got bit by a cat and had to go to the ER as it got infected, and I got all kinds of medicine. I called in and my boss was, "You are calling in for a cat bite? Okay, whatever," and didn't sound happy. He went home to his wife, who is a nurse, and she tells him how dangerous it is. He apologized the next day. Story 32. I was on the calling in end, but I did once call in with heart failure. Had to go to the ER for chest palpitations, ended up admitted for weeks, and diagnosed with heart failure and idiopathic cardiomyopathy. My manager did not believe me when I, a normal 20-year-old girl, called in with a sudden unexpected diagnosis of severe cardiac disease. Story 33. Not me, but my parents. Okay, so mom and dad were addict, and sometimes when dad was at work and mom had scored, she'd ring with some kind of excuse so he could go home and get his fix with her. One day she rings dad, hysterical, and tells him that I had superglued both of my hands to the workbench at home. Dad figured she'd made it up or something, and so did his boss. He went home to be safe and check anyway. Lo and behold, there was my dumb 5-year-old ass with my hands superglued to the table. It took Dad 2 hours and a chisel to get my hands off. I don't remember the chisel part, but I remember putting the glue on and placing my hands on the table. Story 34. This one was me. A few years back, my birthday was on a weekend. I had taken Monday off work, but then Thursday night something went wrong. I woke up sometime after feeling really messed up with a sticky face, so got out of bed and turned on a light. My room looked like a crime scene. Nightstand knocked over, red liquid soaking my sheets on the floor, smeared on the walls and door frames, heading towards the bathroom, all over the sink and staining a towel horribly. I had had a grand mal seizure in my sleep, fell out of bed and hit my head repeatedly on my nightstand. Sometime after that, I got up and tried to clean myself up and went back to bed, but was still so messed up that I have no recollection of it. I then woke up sometime later to find the blood everywhere. So I'm standing there, feeling miserable and looking at myself, thinking, there's no way I can go into work tomorrow, but I have to let my boss know. And I don't want him to think I'm just trying to extend my birthday weekend. So I snapped a picture of myself in the mirror, face bruised and swollen, and texted it to him at like 2 in the morning with a message that I wouldn't be coming in due to having a seizure. I then cleaned myself up, changed the sheets, and went back to sleep. Story 35. Not a manager at the time, but was working night shift at a bar, and my coworker had asked manager right before dinner. Rushed to go home for feeling sick. Manager said, "I can't tell that you're sick if I can't see it. Then, you're healthy enough to work." Well, fast forward to 11 p.m. or so, and he's online busting it for the mini rush we are facing, and blam! Vomit in the entire line cooler, gone. The entire ducking cooler. Needless to say, he went home and the kitchen shut down. Story 36. Not a manager, but was me. I locked myself in the bathroom and the window was too small to climb out. Managed to shout to a neighbor and get a locksmith to come and let me out. Showed the locksmith's receipt to prove it all. Wouldn't have been as funny if I wasn't naked the whole time, too. Story 37. Can this be about school and not a teacher, but a student? Duck it, I'm doing it anyway. I was a nervous wreck my freshman year of high school, which turned my stomach into something worse than the abysmal cesspit it already was. I was a little better with the going home early and going to the nurse my sophomore year, but during my Spanish final, I felt like garbage. Extreme stomach pain, sweating, faintness. I asked to go to the bathroom, had nothing but agony waiting for me there, and came back. Couldn't concentrate on the exam and said I had to go to the nurse. Teacher, who wasn't even the Spanish teacher, he was the only English teacher who didn't like me, said I had to finish. So I raced through the exam, which I failed, and booked it to the nurse's office. In the hall, my guidance counselor passed and said hello, and I responded by throwing up in the water fountain. As she looked on in dawning, docile horror, her wet doe eyes wide and squeaking in, "Oh my." I continued my Tolkien quest for the nurse's office. So I got there and she said it was stress. I was shouting at her at this point and made her call my mom. She said, "Well, he seems to be having a stress incident," to which I grabbed the phone and said, "You need to take me to the hospital now." My mom got there, to the vehement denial of the nurse that anything was wrong, and took me to my regular doctor. He looked at me for all of 2 seconds and said, "I'm calling the hospital to let them know you're on your way. He has appendicitis." Got there. Had to take a bunch of those stupid tests to drink the vanilla a whole flavored milkshake that's actually just dye to see on the scans. Threw it up, they brought me into surgery, and my appendix burst as soon as they took it out. Next day, I called the nurse from the hospital room and said I was feeling better. She asked if my stress was gone, and I said, "No, my appendix is, though. My mom would like to talk to you." Story 38. As an employee at a bakery, I called in sick once with a severe double ear infection, complete with hearing loss. Normally, this wouldn't be a problem, but the day before I had put in my notice of resignation and told my employer I was moving to Australia. He went around bad-mouthing me to other employees and didn't accept the fact I was actually sick until 2 weeks later and my hearing hadn't come back yet. A doctor's note and prescription for antibiotics hadn't convinced him. Only when he came in through the back door and scared the crap out of me when I couldn't hear him walk in. Story 39. I was an opening shift manager at McDonald's at the age of 18. We had a hurricane come through, only a Cat 2, which for us isn't too much cause for concern. However, I lived in the boonies, so I was flooded in. I called my boss and told her that I wouldn't be in until I could safely drive, which wasn't going to be until the lake surrounding our house dried up. She kept pushing me, asking how long until I could get in to open. I was like, "When you can send a boat to sail me in, I am literally surrounded by water. I can't see the road at all. I am sure there's flooding all the way into town, so yeah, I don't think I am coming in today." She threatened to fire me if I couldn't get in. I threatened to sue if she did. The most mind-boggling thing to me was she lived closer to the store than I did and just went through the same ducking hurricane. If you are not in a flooded area, you open the store. Story 40. I had a similar sort of experience working at a Ren fair one year. Other employee and I strike out to grab lunch, do in fact help a little old lady walk up the fairly uneven trail away. This takes us a while, so we're about 10 minutes late to call. Boss is pissed, demands to know where we were. Sorry, we were helping a little old lady cross the road. Boss is incredulous until one of the other performers pipes up, "No, I saw them. They were literally helping a little old lady cross the road." Story 41. At the time this took place, I was running a call center. The employee that this happened to we will refer to as C. C was a compulsive liar. He had been in over 300 street fights and won them all, you know the type. C also had a habit of calling in late and missing work. One morning, CE calls me and tells me he won't be in until later because he was kidnapped by his distant cousin and some of his friends and tortured. Obviously, I didn't believe this and actually laughed at C. We had a pretty good working relationship. After we got off the phone, about 5 minutes go by, and a detective shows up at our office looking for C. I took the detective into my office and asked him if what CE said was true, to which the detective asked me what C had told me happened. I explained he said his cousin and some of his cousin's friends came up from Texas and kidnapped him at gunpoint because he owed them money. They duct taped him to a chair in a basement and proceeded to torture him. They also pistol whipped him and threatened to lost him. He escaped because they said they were going to get Taco Bell, and he was able to get out of the duct tape when they left. After I told the detective all of this, his response was, "That's pretty much how it happened." This was about 6 years ago. Since then, C has passed away due to an unrelated incident. He was only in his late 20s when he passed. Story 42. Right before I got out of the Army, I had a new guy that was just a total duck-up. Bought a truck at like 18% interest, got credit cards at like 15% interest, went out of state without even telling anyone where he was going, was always late, and to top it off, he married an escort. He was your basic stupid private. Well, one day he's not at PT formation. We're calling him and he doesn't answer. So we go to his barracks room, says he has a migraine, and he's not going. We tell him that he should have gone to sick call, and he'll get in all kinds of crap for not going to PT. He says he'll take the counseling statement. Well, my platoon sergeant was ducking pissed when he found out. Was going to give him an Article 15, which means he'd lose rank, pay, and be put on extra duty. Well, an hour later, I get a call from the clinic. He was there on an IV passed out. Apparently, he had put me down as his emergency contact. We told the platoon sergeant, and he just let everything go. Story 43. Had an employee that took bereavement time because his mother passed away. Okay, it happens. 4 or 5 months later, he took bereavement time because his mother died. I was like, what the heck? He tells me he was adopted. His birth mother had just died, and the first one was his adoptive mother. Okay, wow, yeah, fine. 6 months later, he takes bereavement time because his mother passed. I was like, you're kidding me, right? Nope. His parents that adopted him divorced when he was 8. His father remarried when he was 12, and the new wife adopted him. Story 44. Not the manager, but the employee. One Friday night after a shift as a cashier at Walmart when I was 19, at about 11:45 p.m., I was driving 70 miles per hour trying to get home through an industrial area of my town. All of a sudden, right in front of the 3-meter plant, I see a deer for a split second. Then my airbags deployed. My car was totaled and I was get sex up, but wasn't that bad till the next morning. So early the next day, I call my manager saying I was going to miss my shift on Saturday evening. Yeah, busiest and worst shift in Walmart. She, in a very rude tone, told me that if I was going to not be there, I needed to bring in a doctor's excuse. I wasn't even going to see a doctor. I was just going to rest up and be in for my Sunday evening shift the next day. Well, I went to urgent care, get examined. The doctor had just hit a deer herself, going 70 miles per hour a few months earlier. So she gives me a note excusing me from work for a week due to my sprained ankle and other bruises and scars. The look on the manager's face when I limped up to her and handed that get the note was priceless. She started turning red and could barely get out any words. She didn't last long as a manager because she was terrible. But I had my week off and worked there for another few months till I found a better job. Honestly, I still don't know if she really believed me. But when I asked a coworker who drove the same route I did to work in the mornings if he saw the deer carcass I'd hit in that spot on the way in, he said, "No, but I saw the pile of meat that was left from it." Story 45. One of my employees had told me that he had crap his pants within a few minutes of starting his shift. At first I thought it was some crazy excuse to get out of work because retail sucked. But no, he actually crap his pants. He was on some new medication for some stomach issues, and it reacted violently. So yeah, that story has stuck with me for years now. Story 46. As an employee living with severe migraine-like headaches and another neurological condition, I've had a few occasions where I've literally been within a block of work and had a headache hit that dropped me to the ground. And I've had to call from the back of the ambulance saying I won't be in. Numerous times I had to bail mid-shift and I felt like some of the staff thought I just didn't want to work. Then one night I was having a brutal pain day, but I was literally the only dishwasher on staff at that point, so was doing my best to grin and bear it. I managed to hold on until the end of the night as we were cleaning up after close, and the last thing I remember is grabbing onto the shelf at the back end of the dishwasher, and then being in hospital, mid-afternoon the next day, surrounded by doctors and family, fully in the midst of a conversation. Apparently, I'd been answering questions for an hour at that point. The supervisor who'd been working the night before had always seemed skeptical of my issues. But after that night, she bent over backwards to make my shifts as easy as possible for me. Story 47. I spent most of last year on 0 sick leave. From the multiple days off I needed to recover from tonsillitis, I would get at the drop of a hat. Needed med certs every time, because it would always happen after I visited a certain city. Would take a day of leave for a long weekend, boss thought. I just wanted an extra long weekend. Had my tonsils removed this year, healthy as now. Boss just spent a whole week at home sick with tonsillitis and complained the whole time. Story 48. Yet another person who's not a manager. Last summer, my parents took my boyfriend and I out on their boat. It was a cool day, especially out on the ocean, so my git didn't put on any sunscreen. Bad idea, I got sun poisoning all over my chest and shoulders. and ended up throwing up with a fever of 102. Also found out that I'm allergic to aloe by getting a rash over my sun poisoning blisters. When I told my manager, I could tell she thought I was making it up. Turns out, she has never heard of it. She looked it up and popped a cartoon of a girl with blonde hair and blue eyes, just like me with all of the symptoms I explained. She apologized when I came back 2 days later and said, "The cartoon even looked like you." Story 49 happened to me. I'd left my homework in my locker, so my teacher let me go get it. On the way back from getting it, I see a police dog sitting tied up outside a bathroom. Obviously, a policeman was inside using the facilities. So I get near the dog and just said, "Hey boy, how you doing?" Upon me talking to the dog, he barks loudly, jumps up and snatches my homework out of my hand and just straight up eats it. I'm standing there like what the duck just happened and look around just in case anyone saw that. But no one was around. I found the whole situation so bizarre that I couldn't help but laugh when I told my teacher and class what happened. Everyone just starts laughing, and obviously my teacher doesn't believe me. In fact, she called me a ducking idiot, so she gives me a detention. I had to go to security and convince them to look up the incident, and after security stopped crying with laughter, I got a copy and showed my teacher. She was utterly speechless. Story 50. I was the employee. I had 2 friends in their life one day after the other. I found out about the first one on the day he died, right before I walked into work. They sent me home and gave me some time off. Second friend died that night, but I'd already had the rest of the week off to recover. Came in the next week to ask for the next 2 weekends off for funerals. They were confused and looked very skeptical when I said another pass. But they let it go because who's going to call out a grieving 17-year-old girl? My grandfather died the weekend of the second funeral, went in for minor surgery on his toe, and somehow an air bubble got into his IV. Needed a 3rd weekend in a row off for a funeral. My manager looked at me and told me he knew I was lying because I needed time off from the grief of losing one friend. Yes, he did emphasize one, and that this is the last weekend he would comply. I came back after my grandfather's funeral with all 3 funeral pamphlets, a picture of me with my family at the funeral, and printed out screenshots from Facebook showing RIP posts on both friends' accounts. He honestly didn't even schedule me on the weekends after that. Story 51. This is my story I gave to my manager. First off, I had a rough childhood. Anyways, I got hired on as a dishwasher for Cracker Barrel at 16. Before the first day of work, 2 hours before, I called in to let the manager know I couldn't work there because my mom got mad at me and took away my phone and my car. At the time, I lived with my grandparents and we were 20 miles out of town, so it was really hard to get there. The manager was the nicest person ever. He told me to call him back when I'm able to start working. A few weeks later, my mom gives me my car back, but I ended up taking another job at Wendy's. A few months later, the manager from Cracker Barrel calls me and asks me if I'm doing okay and how everything worked out for me. He didn't care that I didn't come back. He just wanted to make sure I was okay because he could tell I was in a lot of emotional distress at the time. Best guy ever. I should have worked there. Story 52. Not a manager, but I witnessed a pretty good one back in high school. The choir director at my high school was a real hard ass. He was especially tough on the dozen or so people in the most advanced choir at the school, which was a relatively big deal. He was especially tough on them during the big yearly dinner production. I was part of a string quartet for the same event, and no one cared much when we showed up. But a choir member arriving late was unthinkable. On one of the last days of rehearsal, a full dress rehearsal, a girl shows up something like half an hour late, maybe more. I was involved in the thing for several years, and I had never seen or even heard of this happening before. He immediately demanded an explanation, and she paused and then hesitantly said, "I found a dead body and had to deal with the police." He clearly didn't believe her, and neither did anyone else. She got yelled at. I think she was made to sing something embarrassing in front of all 50 or so people involved. I don't remember what. She was clearly going to be in trouble for a while, and I think her part might even have been threatened. Very few people made it into that choir at all, and then the parts in the production were even harder to get. The next day, the choir director was profusely apologetic and embarrassed. There was a news article in the local paper about the police investigating a body that she had found in the pond by her house. Story 53. About a year ago, I was working in retail. During that time, my grandfather passed away very suddenly. It was quite a shock. Rosters had already been put out, and I was scheduled to work during the day of his funeral. I went to my manager and told her my grandfather had passed, and I needed that day off to attend his funeral and mourn. She laughed and dismissed it, told me I was to show up that day or I would be fired. I requested the day off multiple times over, and even referenced another employee who was given 3 days off to grieve her aunt's passing just a few weeks prior, all to no avail. I was continually told I would be fired if I didn't show up. I ended up having to race to work after the funeral, was 15 minutes late, reprimanded, and just spent the whole shift crying. A few hours later, my dad, who was a regular at the store and very friendly with my manager, came in wearing a suit. My manager saw him and cheerfully exclaimed, "You sure do look fancy today. What's the occasion?" To which he just dead stared her and said, "Told you her grandfather's funeral was today." She seriously didn't believe me up until that point. Story 54. Not an employer, but employee. At the time, my manager and I were on shaky ground. We weren't getting along. I hated his crap. He didn't care for mine either. He was demanding a report from me, which I could only produce on the office computer. I got to the office 2 minutes early, which was an accomplishment, considering I was normally 30 minutes late. I arrive and I see fire trucks in our tiny office just in a massive ball of flame. No crap, so I'm kind of awestruck, like, crap. And a few minutes passes by and my boss calls and goes, "Cohen, where are my reports?" I said, "I can't do them right now." He said, "What's your excuse this time?" I said, "The office is on fire." "What do you mean the office is on fire?" I said. "I mean the entire office is just one big giant ducking bonfire." He calls bullcrap. Says he's going to be down here in 20 minutes. And if that office isn't on fire, I'm fired. 20 minutes later, he shows up. Sure as crap, the office is still on ducking fire, and he just stares at it in total disbelief like, crap, Cohen wasn't lying this time. I guarantee you the first question he had go through his head was, did Cohen set my office on fire to cover up his lateness? To which when he asked a firefighter how long they've been here, the guy told him about 2 hours. FYI, office fire was caused by coworker and his need to keep every ducking piece of paper and his space heaters. No one was hurt. Story 55. Had a teller call me and say she had an accident on the way to work. I said, "Oh my gosh, are you okay?" She said she was fine, but it wasn't that kind of accident. Oh, she had an altercation with another teller the day before, so I didn't believe her. But then I was thinking who would call and say I crapped myself just to get out of work. Anyways, I went to my supervisor as I was still questioning it and found out that one of her medications made that an issue for her sometimes. So it was legit and she had no shame in admitting it. We had a senior skip day thing and I ended up going to this pool party last minute. Well, I got this horrible sunburn. I think it classified as sun poisoning. My shoulders were covered in blisters. It hurt to move. I called into the restaurant I worked at and told my boss it was too bad and I was going to try to take an oatmeal bath. Not as fun as it sounds. And he said it could not be that bad and made me come in anyways. I got up, got dressed, and drove to work. I walked in the door and he stopped me. "Let me see it." I pulled my collar back and he said, "Oh God, go home." So I left and went home. Still bitter, he made me come in anyways. Story 56. One of my former employees was a beekeeper as a side job. She called it in one day and said she might not be able to come into work, but that she was coming in to show me why. She came in and her right eye was very swollen. Turns out a bee had crawled up her nose and stung the inside of her nose. She wasn't very allergic to bees, but she ended up having a mild allergic reaction and had to go to the hospital. Story 57. I had a stomach bug and was working at a daycare. Told the director I was sick. She told me to come in or be fired. So I went in. All morning I'd race to the bathroom because I thought I would throw up, only I never did. She thought I was faking to leave early until the last time. Didn't quite make it to the toilet. Got puke on the floor. I tried cleaning it up but didn't do a good job, and she sent me home. The owner came in, smelled the puke, and made her clean the bathroom. Love that story. Story 58. Oh boy. Well, I'm a high school student, and this actually has to do with one of my teachers, but very similar. My grandma, who I was very close with, passed away on a Sunday night. I was really torn up for the rest of the night and never got to do my Spanish homework. The next day, I go into class a bit early to explain my situation and my conversation with the teacher, who is widely hated. Goes a bit like this. Keep in mind, I'm a pretty good student. I have a solid A in the class, and I turn in all my work on time. Me, "Hola, señora. Last night my grandma, who I was really close with, passed away. I didn't get to doing the homework. Could I possibly turn it into you tomorrow?" Teacher, "En español, por favor." I stared at her blankly until I realized she wanted me to tell her my grandma had died in Spanish. When I didn't respond, she continued with, "You have a record of making up excuses," which I don't. I don't know if I believe you. At that point, I was ready to scream, "Do you want me to show you her ducking ashes?" But I didn't, and calmly told her I would have my mom email her. The next day, my mom emailed her, and she finally decided to believe me. Now it's been like 2 months since that incident, and I still hate her so much. I can't wait till I'm a senior, so on the last day I can just cuss her out. Story 59. I'm neither the manager nor the employee in question in this story, but I still feel like it's worth telling. When I was 16 or 17, I worked at a chain restaurant that wasn't quite fast food, but wasn't fancy or anything either. One afternoon, I was coming in to start my evening shift when the other staff starts to inform me about a drama that is leaving us understaffed. One of our employees, who was very good and trustworthy, might I add, had called in for his friend that had recently started. He informed the managers that his friend couldn't come in because he had died the night before. Now, for some stupid reason I don't understand, our manager was convinced it was a lie and thought the employee probably got arrested. So he spent the entire morning shift checking the local arrest records. I didn't feel right about this, because why would someone lie about their best friend dying suddenly? But everyone else was convinced too. By the time we closed that night, it was confirmed that he had drowned the night before while swimming with friends in the lake. They never recovered his body. I hope the managers learned a lesson about assuming, but I'm doubtful. Story 60. Not a manager. But when I was 14, I ended up waking up the Monday after spring break, around 5 a.m., with the worst stomach pains of my life. My mom was the only one who believed I wasn't trying to buy an extra day of spring break. My dad told her she had to wait until the doctor's office opened, as he was not paying a walk in her bill for me faking a stomach ache. I wait until 9 a.m. and finally go see my doctor. He doesn't believe me either and tells me I probably have a UTI and sends me home. He says if it gets worse, I can go up to the hospital for a CAT scan. By 1, I can't move, and I'm crying because I'm in so much physical pain. My mom, bless her soul, takes me to the hospital and basically says, screw my dad and the doctor. Yeah, I had appendicitis, and my appendix had managed to tuck itself underneath my colon. Needless to say, I was rushed into emergency surgery. Story 61. Not my employee, but my co-worker. Snowy morning on the way to work, he stops to help someone that slide off into a ditch, and while talking to her, another car slides on the same ice, hits his car, and knocks it from the shoulder into road. In a panic, he gets in his car to try to move it off the road, and another car slides on that same ice and hits him again. No one believed him till he showed us the 2 separate police reports. Story 62. This was me. 2 years ago, while on my way to work, I suddenly had an onslaught of not-stop coughing and had to be admitted into a hospital. I fell unconscious for an unknown period, waking up to tubes up my nose and had to be admitted for about 2 months. I had no way of contacting my workplace, obviously, so my boss was wondering about where I was. Midway through my stay, I had to call back and inform my boss about being admitted to hospital, but still could not go to work. The funny thing was, the medical certificate that the hospital gave me looked suspiciously like a forged one, since there was no logo and it was all black and white. And my supervisor told me to get a proper one, so I had to get them to print something that looked more official. When I went back to work, I had to tell my boss that I could no longer work full-time for him due to requiring dialysis treatment every other day. Story 63. I've been that person calling in. I used to work for the NHS and as such had access to nurses' halls. Whilst I found somewhere permanent to live, the halls themselves were small rooms from the Victorian era, old heavy doors, etc. Also, cockroaches, rats, and creepy old nurses. I woke up one morning ready to have a nice walk in the sun to work and pulled at my room door handle, and it came apart in my hands, locking me in the room. I called my boss, and she didn't believe me until I called the other office, based in another part of the building I lived in, to get the porter to come help me. I had 3 social workers come look, and sure enough, I was stuck. The mechanism had completely broken. I'd already tried using the square bit to turn the handle thing, and they had to break the door off its hinges and yank the whole lock and handle mechanism. It was a right palaver. Bonus story. Once had someone throw up on me in a staff lift making my way to my office, in the same job. I literally walked into the lobby and they all flinched. I managed to clean off the most of it, grabbed some scrubs, and went straight home to shower and recover. Story 64. The car my mom was taking me to work in caught on fire and burned down to the frame, basically. It happened in the parking lot at work, though, so I'm sure they believed me. Story 65. I worked at Festival Foods a few years ago, and for those of you who don't know, they have a point system there. Coming in 5 minutes late is 0.5 points. No call, no show is 5 points. Once you reach 10, you are fired. I had to miss 2 days of work there, weekend shifts, both 8 hours, because my grandpa was in the ER and lives 3 hours away from me. I called my manager when I was on my way to see my grandpa, and he just said, "Yeah, okay. Yep, see you Monday." When I got back to work the following Monday, I had received 3 points for each day I had missed. For clarification, when I brought this up to HR, they said there's nothing they could do. 1 month later, I was yelled at in front of my coworkers by the building manager for smiling too much, because it showed a lack of respect for authority. I quit 3 days after that. Story 66. I was the manager of a dry cleaner store. One day I was incredibly sick, running fever and felt like vomiting all day. I called my boss, the GM, told him I needed to go home because I had a fever and was probably going to vomit. He told me I wasn't allowed to go home. I made him come to the store to see my fever was over 100. He came over and brought a load of clean clothes, and I proceeded to vomit over them and caused about $800 of cleaning to be either re-cleaned or ruined because he didn't believe me. I was allowed to go home. Story 67. I dropped a glass and hit my foot once and called in to work. They refused to let me out of work, but my supervisor said she'd love to see a picture of it. Anyway, had to work 4 hours before I could go to the ear and ended up needing 7 stitches. Thank God for duct tape. By the way, duct tape hurts like crap when you peel it off of a wound. Story 68. This is close enough to fit in. My now mother-in-law won a trip to Cancun in 2014. My boyfriend and I were both in college, but didn't want to pass up on a free trip. We warned all of our teachers months in advance, and also reminded them before we left. We get back and find out that the a-hole grad teacher had freaked out during class for like 10 minutes, calling us lazy asses, yelling at our other group members, etc. Our friend politely reminded him that we'd warned him we would be gone. The teacher went pale and basically just said, "Oh, right." I was honestly really pissed when I found out. Story 69. I worked at a fine dining restaurant and was scheduled a double on January 1st. I called in saying I couldn't go to work because I injured my back, but I was reassuring my manager I was not hungover. He was just like, yeah, okay, and thought I was totally bullcrapting. A few weeks later, during the Valentine's shift, my back got so bad I collapsed mid-shift, went to the hospital, and was admitted for 6 days. About 2 months later, I was admitted again, but for a month, and had to have extensive back surgery and was unable to return to the restaurant. It wasn't until I showed up literally using a walker, because I had to relearn how to walk again. Was he like, "Oh wow, didn't realize how bad it really was. Thought you were being dramatic." Yeah, I just go to the hospital for a month and have to have life-altering back surgery for the dramatic effect. Story 70. I had a former employee who called out constantly because of issues with her kids. It happened before court, before staffings, and other instances. I gave her work from home options, but many times I found it ridiculous. However, I never faulted her for it because she always within like 5 minutes sent a text with a doctor's slips, a copy of the thermometer at fever levels, etc. Edit. Having my own kid made me understand all the more. Story 71. Not the manager, but was a witness. Basically, my manager's a good man, but he's kind of a pain in the ass when it comes to getting him to understand that the human body has its days. So one day my coworker calls in sounding like death, but admittedly, it sounded kind of played, but I know he's an honest guy. I passed the department phone off to my manager, who proceeded to spout nonsense by saying that we needed him in and that there was nobody else to cover. Truthfully, we would have been fine. Anyways, said coworker, comes in looking pale as a ghost. He's full-blown Spanish. Not 2 minutes into being there, and this guy vomits on the floor right in front of our manager. We sent him home and ended up closing without any issues. Story 72. A while ago, one of my ex-coworkers didn't show up to work on a Monday because he said he was jumped, kidnapped, and put into the trunk of a car and driven 2 states away. He got tossed out of the car and left there. He showed us the police report. Story 73. I was the employee, and my boss didn't believe me until I showed up with stitches and a black eye. My cat accidentally scratched my face, near my left eye. I panicked, thinking she had gotten my literal eye. I was envisioning eye jelly running down my face at this point, National Guard career over, etc., and passed the hell out. I fell on the tile floor, got a massive knot on my forehead, and had a small seizure. My husband drove me to the ear, where I got to experience facial sutures and a Keats scan. This happened late at night, and we didn't get home until about 5 a.m. I emailed my boss to tell her I was taking a sick day because I'd been hurt by my cat and had been at the ER all night. I got a, "Fine, whatever. We'll talk about it when you're back to work," sort of response, which was code for, "I think you're full of crap." She actually felt sort of bad after she saw the state of my face. Story 74. I don't ask for proof. Regardless of how unbelievable the excuses, you need to trust your staff. The good ones don't lie, the bad ones generally get performance managed out. I don't see the need to be an arsehole about something that might be unlikely but will almost certainly be traumatic. Same as time off for medical appointments and family emergencies. I just let them take the time off, unless there's a genuine crisis in the workplace, and they are genuinely rare. You'd be astonished how grateful people are, and how motivated they are if you treat them with a little bit of respect and dignity. A few might take the piss, but if they know you'll make life easy for them, if they are in genuine need, they tend not to. Story 75. I had an employee no-call, no-show for a week of his shifts. I couldn't reach his phone. Our policy after 3 consecutive no-call, no-shows, we send a letter of your termination. Apparently he was in a jail, and his girlfriend was too scared to answer and just tell us he was in jail. Apparently his girlfriend's ex showed up with a baseball bat to fight him. My employee took the bat and beat the ex up instead. Story 76. I was that employee. Had some wisdom teeth issues, but ignored it. They got infected. I yawned in the stockroom and pus shot in my mouth, so it was time to see a dentist. Midday, middle of the week, walked to my manager and said, I need to take off. I need to get my wisdom teeth pulled. She knew I hadn't had a day off or gone to a dentist or scheduled anything, so she questioned it. I told her I have an infection and they need to come out immediately. She still questioned it. So I opened my mouth, pushed on my cheek, and let her watch the pus shoot out. Send me home on the spot. Story 77. Everyone thought I was full of crap when I said that I was allergic to olives and olive oil. I'm a cook and work fine dining, so this is kind of ridiculous. Then I went into anaphylactic shock one day. Everyone believes me now. I'm also allergic to bananas, shrimp, and tree nuts. I don't know how I'm still alive either. Everyone also knows how passionate I am about my work now. I choose to work in this industry despite my extreme allergies. Story 78. I'm not the manager, I'm the employee. Opened my front door, bat swooped in, flopped on my head, was now in my house chirping and being weird, was hiding from it in another room, waiting for animal control. That's when I texted my boss, hiding in my kitchen from a, turned out to be, rabid bat, swooping around my living room at 8 a.m. in the middle of the city. They 100% believed me because, actually, that sort of crap would happen to me. I eventually had to go to the hospital and get a whole crapton of shots because animal control tested the bat. It was rabid. We couldn't guarantee that it didn't bite or scratch my head, so yay. Story 79. Not really applicable, but I had an employee disappear, and for the first month, no one, not even his wife and daughter, could find him. He turned up at work 3 months later. He had been in an ICE detention center with very limited access to the outside world. His green card had been flagged because when he applied for citizenship, he had a ticket for reckless driving, like 115 and a 45, that he had paid for, done community service when he was 18, at least 10 years earlier. After that, he always called it, "That time I went to summer camp." Story 80. Not manager, but employee. I got a serious concussion at work by dropping a case of beer on my head on accident. At first, I didn't think it was a big deal, so I left work when my shift ended and drove 30 minutes home. The next day, I couldn't see, was shaking violently, and could not remember for crap. So to the ER, I went because everywhere I called said my symptoms indicated my brain was swelling. When I let my bosses know I was in the ER for a workman's comp case, they didn't believe me and went and asked everyone I worked with that day to make sure this incident actually happened. Story 81. I once slipped in the basement while getting out my bike, got a concussion despite already wearing a helmet. It probably would have been more believable to just say I had a concussion and leave it at that. Another time, I was a subtenant in an apartment for a few months. Was about to leave for work when the tenant's creative rewiring finally decided to start smoldering behind a shelf full of books. He had left the continent for a trip, and I was left to deal with the mess. Guess people at least get entertainment when I miss work. Story 82. Employee called and said he was in a car accident where he hit a horse and rode off his car on the way to work. We work in the middle of a city, and he didn't commute rurally, so I basically told him I didn't believe him. And there'd be consequences if he didn't come in, and he insisted, no, hit a horse. It exploded, as did the front end of his ride. Fine, prove it. So he comes in with the insurance paperwork, and it's all there. And it was some light local news. I guess the horse was a pet at a facility for mentally handicapped folks, sort of a therapy horse, and someone left a gate open. Story 83. This one was actually my excuse. My car caught fire while I was driving it from the inside due to a faulty cigarette lighter. It went from economy car to towering inferno in about 5 minutes. I got a relative to give me a ride to work, but as I was smelling heavily like smoke and God knows what else, they just sent me home. Story 84. Not a manager, but I called in late because my cat locked me out of my apartment. I had a table next to my front door, and the cat had jumped up and pawed at the inside deadbolt. No exterior lock, so that it closed just enough that I wasn't able to open the door. I stayed at my neighbor's place that night. I had to wait until the morning for the maintenance office to open and pop the sliding back door out so I could get in. Story 85. So I had an employee who had been having stomach issues on and off for a few months, but it kept getting worse until finally he went to the ER. Turns out he had colon cancer. Not that I didn't believe him, but I didn't want to believe him when he told me. Still talk to him on a regular basis and make sure he's doing okay. Great guy. Several members of the company we both worked for went to visit him in the hospital, myself included. Story 86. It was my excuse. I had to call in 30 minutes before my shift because then my boyfriend had shot himself through the hand at point blank with a 40 cal hollow point. I was just walking up to his house to drop some things off before I went to work. When I got out of my car, I heard the gun go off. I drove him to the ER and stayed with him most of the night. My mother went to his place and waited until the cops showed. Good time. Story 87. Well, I didn't miss work, but I had shattered my front teeth falling out my front door like a ducking idiot and landing face first on the pavement. I did not talk much that day and did miss work the next day to visit the dentist and get them fixed. Story 88. Not a manager, but years ago, Simone called in sick to work with the excuse that his dog ate his car keys and they had to go to the vet. The dude was kind of a flake, so he just kind of went right. Next day, he had a picture of his dog at the vet and a pic of the x-ray. He didn't just eat his car key, he swallowed the whole key ring, house key, car key, keychain and all. Story 89. A couple weeks ago, I had a girl call in because she was putting her dog down later in the day and didn't feel comfortable coming into work. Weeks prior to this day, all she could talk about was how she was supposed to go see Ellen, but couldn't get her shift covered. So I thought she had just come up with an extravagant excuse to get out of work. Turns out, she was actually putting her dog down. I felt like an a-hole for not believing her. Story 90. I was on the other side of this one, but I hiccuped for 40 hours, missing 2 days of work with the excuse of hiccuping. It was a huge joke until I came in with a note from the hospital with a super detailed reason for anyone wondering. My diaphragm started to hurt after 6 hours, and I only got about 2 hours of sleep a night because the hiccups would wake me up. It was ducking awful. Story 91. The old gag in higher ed is that you'd never believe how many grandparents die the week of papers due. Sad truth is when I was in college, I lost 3 grandparents in the span of 3 years, all during finals week of different semesters. So yeah, I generally sympathize when kids use this excuse. I assume they're telling the truth unless someone offers proof to the contrary. Story 92. Does it count the other way? I got stuck in the elevator for 3 hours and had to cancel my appointments while sending pics of the evolution of my rescue so they'd believe me. Story 93. Not a manager. Higher ed prof, administrator, student emails me and says she can't make her exam today because of car trouble. I'm about to call bullcrap and zero her exam when I see there's an attached image. It's a cell phone picture of her car, a mile or so from the school, on fire. I let her take the test later. Story 94. My husband was the manager. I was a coworker. This girl came up to us talking and told him she needed to go early. He asked why. She was on her period and had literally soaked her pants down to the cuff. It happened 3 times total. We told her to go to a doctor. Story 95. I went wedding dress shopping and then called into work because my fever spiked to 104. My managers required an urgent care visit and 3 doctor's notes and kept trying to get me to come back early because they were understaffed. I had the flu and pneumonia and worked with clients on hospice. Ugh. Story 96. Spider egg hatched under his steering wheel. On the way to work, he sent me a shirtless selfie of him in front of his car on the side of the highway. He then proceeded to send me pictures of the hell that unfolded inside of his car, thousands of little baby spiders everywhere. Story 97. I was the employee. I got locked in my house. The latch disconnected and would no longer pull back when the was turned. I ended up climbing down the balcony. Story 98. I'm not coming in today. I crap in my pants again on the drive. Never asked for proof. The anguished tone was enough for me. Plus, I got a lot of enjoyment out of the fact that he said, again, couldn't stand that kid. Story 99. Fortunately, I've never had to deal much with nonsense. But I think the best text I ever got was, my husband got back from being away for a couple weeks, and we drank too much wine, so I'm too hungover to come in. I appreciated the honesty. What's the most absurd excuse someone has given you for being late that turned out to be true? Story 1. I gave an excuse in high school to my principal saying my dad wasn't letting me go to school because he was having a tantrum. So I took the city bus to go to school. She called him. He was even more mad because I went to school. I did tell her. Story 2. One of the interns in my lab last year was somehow in 2 non-injurious but reasonably devastating car accidents in a single week. She took the bus for the rest of her time working with us, which was itself an excuse for arriving slightly late. But after all she'd been through, no one would say a word about it. Story 3. Friend said she was late to class because her toaster was on fire. I laughed my ass off. She wasn't kidding. She was making breakfast, and her toaster spontaneously combusted. She had to throw it out in the snow. Story 4 had a staff member call me to say they weren't sure they could come into work because someone had stolen their front door. I lived around the corner from them, so on the way to work, I drove past their house, and sure enough, they were there with the police filing a report on a missing door. Story 5. I was giving out training at a call center. So for all my trainees, I was a teacher, their HR contact point, their supervisor, their boss, and their dad. So this one guy called in because he was right outside the office, but he fell down an open manhole cover. There had been a light flood the night before, and it hadn't fully drained, and there was not only soaked, but smelled like a possum playing possum. He was so flustered he was crying, and it was about 20 minutes before the shift started. Lucky for him, I was friends with the clerks at the gas station across the street and was a hardcore party animal. So I always had a spare change of clothes in my desk. Went with him to the gas station and asked for the bathroom key. He didn't want anyone in the office to see him like this. Otherwise, I would have taken him to my office or to the facility's restrooms. I'm not that heartless. Told him to get in, get undressed, and take an escort shower, and I would be back in 10 minutes with fresh clothes. And that he could have the day off, and I would be emailing him all the info we covered in training that day. And to keep his cell phone at hand because I was going to call him when I was out with the clothes for him. I called, gave him my emergency clothes and a bag for his damp ones, and sent him on his way home. I didn't even report his absence, since he was online the whole day as soon as he got home, and I just called him, so he could listen in on the presentation and follow the slides on his computer and text me any questions. I settled a lot, and no longer party like a beast. Yet, I still keep a travel bag with a full set of clothes, deodorant, cologne, and a towel, just in case someone else who is also around my size needs a hero or I have an accident. Story 6. I used to live by a church that had a live nativity scene around Christmas time, with sheep and everything. So one night, Dad and I were on our way to meet my mom and grandma at a restaurant for my grandma's birthday. We were already running late, so my dad was driving a bit fast for where we were in the city. As we're driving, a white blur runs in front of the truck, and my dad couldn't stop in time. Turns out we ended up hitting one of the sheep that escaped from the nativity scene. We then had to wait for the people from the church, dressed all in nativity costumes, to come and discuss what to do with the unfortunately deceased sheep. My dad called my mom and said we were going to be late because we hit a sheep on the way to the restaurant. She definitely did not believe us until my dad sent a photo to her of this poor sheep. Story 7. I used to work at a Walmart and was late one time because there were multiple tigers running loose. Did I mention I live in Oklahoma? And yes, this is 100% true. If you are skeptical and feel the need for a laugh, Google Joe Exotic. He runs a large tiger and wildlife refuge in southern Oklahoma and is quite the character. Story 8. It's less being late and more didn't show up at all. But in a way, he was late to meet me. A friend of mine met a guy who also had a single friend, and soon, matchmaking is attempted. They spend like a month and a half hyping this dude up, and yet, he doesn't show up on 3 separate occasions. He texted me weeks after I said it was okay for him to have my number. So long afterwards that my friend had to ask me if that was still cool. When we finally met, after weeks of hype and me being the third wheel, his excuse was that no one told him that I existed until the week before. I didn't believe him since it was such a big honking deal on my end of the situation. So I assumed that he must have thought I was a grenade, that he was just looking for a hookup and had no options, or that he was just flaky. So I did not have a very high opinion of him right out of the gate, and I was a bit suspicious of him. Turns out, he was telling the truth. Somehow his best friend forgot to tell him about me, even though there had been weeks of hype, and all of these outings were arranged specifically for us to meet. It took over a month for his friend to even say, "Hey, my girlfriend has a friend you might like." The kicker was that my friend's boyfriend was the one who first suggested this whole thing. He forgot his own ducking idea. Story 9. The intern that I mentored had my grandma died as an excuse for taking a couple days before a long holiday, 3 times in a row. Dude was very much a slacker and had some sizable issues with getting to work on time and leaving on time, but no reason to question the first time. Second time seemed odd, but people have 2 grandmas. Third time, I actually had to go and ask him about it. Turns out, his dad died when he was a year old or so. He was raised by his paternal grandmother and his mother, who also had her own mother alive, for 10 or so years. Then mother married another lad, with full blessings from his late father's family too, who also had his own mother. He actually had 3 working grandmas, and the 3 passed each a couple days before a consecutive holiday, one after the other. He was just that unlucky. He actually made a point of bringing the 3 certificates later. We didn't really ask for it, but it dawned him how weird it looked like. And yes, as he got more mature, he picked up the slack and became one of the most reliable guys I've ever worked with. Story 10. A journalist in our town pass when a deer dove straight into the windshield and coworker was right behind the guy. I wasn't the boss, but we were so busy at my high school job and all just thought, what a ducking a hole making this crap up to get out of work. I felt bad when I realized he truly did just watch a deer hit a guy in front of him and duck up his car too. Story 11. I went to use the bathroom before prom and the lock broke and I was stuck. I showed up a few hours late and nobody believed me. So I called my brother and had him confirm. Story 12. This was my excuse. I'm never late and I'm rarely off sick. I was just about to leave for work when my heavily pregnant cat decided to start the early stages of giving birth. I phoned my boss, who happens to be a cat lover, and told her that my cat was giving birth and I didn't want to leave her on her own. She was very understanding, but she kept wanting pictures of the kitten. Story 13. I was late to work once because I lost my disabled parakeet somewhere in my room, She had walked under my dresser and was waiting patiently for me to come rescue her. Took forever to find her. Story 14. Tornado ripped my coworker's house off its foundation, flung her husband into a tree, and hit him. They were trying to make it to the basement, and she was in front. It knocked her down the stairs and broke her back and some other bones. We live in a place that never had tornadoes, and it was in the middle of the night. Nobody knew it was coming until it was there. We all got up, came to work, and wondered where our coworker was. Then heard there'd been bad winds that caused damage. She lived 30 minutes up the road right off, a major interstate. They had not yet declared it a tornado. Once we all got online and saw photos on social media, it was awful. But we still kind of assumed she was just caught up in everything. We didn't know until that afternoon what all happened to her and her husband. I went there to her house, and it was so creepy. You had to get a permit to get in because of theft risk. All the exterior and interior walls and roof were gone, but her bedroom furniture was still there, and the sheets and comforter were on the bed and still tucked at the bottom. There was even a big fuzzball of cat hair. She had a few cats, don't recall what happened to them, on the hardwood floor tumbling around, which looked like normal floors, except for where the walls had been torn out. It was so eerie how some things looked untouched, and the rest was just gone. Story 15. So happy I remembered this story today. Was in my final year of high school, and we were waiting for one of my friends to turn up to school to register in the morning. Turns out one of his guard dog Rottweilers had jumped up and bitten his junk when he was walking into the kitchen in the morning. He getting stitches. Story 16. One of my coworkers called in, saying he'd be late because he ran himself over with a car and was going to the emergency room. His father worked at the same company, so my boss called him up to give him a little ribbing over the obvious excuse. Boss: so, I hear your son has been in an accident. Dad: oh, he'll be fine. He only broke his arm, which is a lot better than it could have been. I mean, what kind of dumbass tries to stop a moving car by getting out and pushing? Boss: oh, that's good to hear. Dad: yeah, anyway, his mother and I are revoking his car privileges for the rest of the summer. So would it be okay to swap him to mornings so he can ride in with me? Boss: sure. Story 17. Around 2000 to 2001, I was working in a supermarket. Lots of employees, mostly part-time students like me, and the odd few who either couldn't move on or didn't have the options, whatever. We had one young woman in particular who was the worst bullcrapter I've ever seen. She'd make the weirdest excuses that were so obviously fake, but somehow she always got away with it. I think her grandmother probably passed 4 times. I was opening the shop one Saturday morning, knowing that I'd have to deal with Ms. Bullcrapter and her twice-a-week period cramps all day. Unsurprisingly, there was a message on the machine recorded overnight. Hey, it's Ms. Bullcrapter. I can't make it in today. My dog got kidnapped and they want a ransom. Stop. Nothing else. What the duck? I saved the message and played it for the boss a few hours later, and he had an instant meltdown. Started filling out paperwork to fire her and tried to call her back, but only got the machine. He basically told her that she didn't have to bother coming back, etc. A couple of days later, she comes in with a police report stating that she had in fact reported a legit burglary, that her dog had been kidnapped for ransom, and that they'd spotted a couple of addicts with the dog. It even made the local newspaper with a statement from one of the officers who found the dog. Go figure. The truth of that story kept her job safe for a little while, but she was fired a couple of months later for refusing to come in after she'd mistakenly thought she was off that day. Story 18. As a teaching assistant in college, I've heard a lot of things, but these 3 take the cake. Had a student email me the day of a midterm explaining he would be late because his car was stuck. He then attached a picture his mom had taken of him, standing in front of his car, which had fallen through the ice on a lake beside his house. It had thawed prematurely. Also had a girl say she was going to be consistently late to section because her parents were under threat of deportation, and she had to regularly attend meetings with their lawyer and translate for her parents, who were Syrian. Last one was a doozy. Shortly after my students wrote their final exam, I counted and cross-checked that I had one for every student. I noticed one girl was missing. I notified the professor, and he said to come up to his office. I did, and as I was walking up with the tests, the girl walked past me with an armful of papers and binders, looking devastated. When I asked the prof what happened, he explained that 2 years ago she had taken the same class with him. At the end of the semester, she told him her father had died and that she needed to defer the exam and final paper. He granted her the extension, then looked into it and found out she lied. She was nearly expelled and had to seek mandatory counseling because of it. Anyway, she retook the class with us. 3 weeks before the end of the semester, her father was diagnosed with terminal cancer. She had gone in to meet the prof with all of his scans and paperwork to prove it. Talk about crying wolf. Story 19. I was late, and so was my homework, because my books got run over by about 15 trains. The afternoon before, at the train station on my way home from school, someone had snuck up and pulled up my skirt to around my waist, reflexively trying to pull it back down. I'd chucked the books I was carrying in the air. A couple landed on the tracks, and there were no attendants at the station to help retrieve them. Not that that is exactly their job. After trying and failing to find a stick long enough to sweep them to the edge, I was forced to look on, horrified, as my train arrived and ran right over them. I gave up and boarded the train home, unwilling to stick around and risk death by train, electrocution for the sake of my chemistry homework. Even though it had been a sizable project, I had no chance of replicating that night. The next morning, I came back through the station to go to school. Sure enough, my books were still there, and had very obviously been bounced around under every train between South London and the city, since the day before the previously doodled and dog-eared specimen of my workbook now sported huge black scorch marks, and was torn almost in two by what looked like raptor claws, its curled pages sticking out at strange angles with burnt edges. I had a bit of a rep for not doing my homework anyway, and was in a kind of last-chance saloon situation with the teacher in question. So I spent about 40 minutes getting an attendant to help me get them back as proof of my innocence. He eventually leant out and grabbed it with a trash grabber, and shortly thereafter, I bust into my chemistry class 30 minutes late, brandishing its sorry remains. I presented it to my appalled chemistry teacher. Most of the pages were fused together, but I managed to find a scrap in there that showed part of the homework that I had in fact done. She wasn't happy, but I escaped unscathed. Story 20. At the time, Gilmore Girls was on TV and really popular with everyone. There was an episode where Rory was on her way to school, driving her mom's Jeep, and a deer hit her car. When she arrives at school late, she explains that a deer hit her. "You hit a deer?" someone asks. "No, I got hit by a deer." It was like 2 days after that episode aired that I was on my way to work, stopped at a red light, and a big buck came charging out of the woods and rammed the side of my minivan. I finally get to work and tell my female boss, "I got hit by a deer." "Say," she asks, "you hit a deer?" "No, I got hit by a deer." She rolls her eyes at me and gives me that look like I must be totally lame and says, "Really? You couldn't even come up with something a little more original than a line that you just saw on Gilmore Girls?" I took her down to the parking lot and showed her my car. There was actually a piece of broken antler, still wedged in between the doors. Story 21. It was actually me. There's a house in the middle of the road. They were transporting a house on a trailer on this small town back road. He tried making an impossible turn and was stuck sideways for a good 30 minutes. Funny thing is, it was literally in eyesight of my job. I called my boss and told him to step outside and look. I couldn't get to work though because the train track was in the way and the house was blocking my path. Story 22. I was driving back to my house from my parents' house in Central Texas to go to work the next day. This is about a 2 to 3 hour drive, depending on the construction traffic in Temple on I-35. So I left at about 9 so I could get a little sleep before work. I was just starting my trip on this 70-mile-per-hour road, which means 75 in Texas, when I saw something walking dead center of my lane, about 10 feet in front of me. I didn't have my brights on because this small highway was notorious for giving tickets for brights. So I didn't get a look at it until it was a half second from going under the car. It kind of looked like a cat and a raccoon had an abomination of an offspring. It was about the same height of a dachshund, but super fat. In the half second it took to travel, faster than I could form the thought, I clearly remember thinking to myself, is that a ducking beaver? When I hit it, it was so fat that it picked up my front end a little to accommodate its gargantuan body, and I heard it hit everything on its way out. Long list of damages, but the main one was that it punched a huge hole in my oil pan and ripped an apparently critical line out of my engine. I pulled over on the shoulder right when my oil light came on, assessed the damage, and then went to confirm that it was indeed a beaver in Central Texas. The nearest lake being 25 miles west, apparently the recent rains we had drove them out to seek new homes. I swore mafia-style revenge on any beaver I encounter as a police officer was pulling up, told my supervisor and lead about it. Neither believed me until I sent pictures. I had hit the beaver directly above its eyeline and cut, not gouged, directly back to its ears with the front end support. Weirdest thing to ever have happened to me, short of paranormal. Story 23. I had a date with a girl, and she texted me that she's not coming. I asked why, because we texted all the time and got along very well. She then said that she got robbed at work by a man with a gun. I didn't believe her, she said. Just wait till tomorrow, it will be in the news. Well, it was in the news, and obviously that was the last time I heard of her. Pes. It was in Germany. Robberies with guns don't happen that often here. Edit. Not late, more like not at all, but whatever. Story 24. My coworker was late one day and eventually came in an hour later. Said the cops came to talk to her because her car had been involved in a drive-by shooting. Funny thing is, the car was in her normal parking spot and undamaged. She said some guys had stolen her car, committed their drive-by, and then returned the car to the spot. Sounded unbelievable. Turned out to be true. Story 25. My colleague called me last week to say he'll be about 15 minutes late for his breakfast shift. His cat had found her way into his car the night before. and he'd found her while halfway to work. He now had to drive the rest of the journey with her curled up on his lap and had to phone his husband to pick her up from there. On the plus side, I got to say hello to a kitty, making my 7 a.m. post-wedding shift a lot more bearable. Story 26. One time in college, I spent days cramming for a big midterm. I was super worried about it, and the night before the test, I stayed up till about 3 or 4 a.m. studying. I woke up the next day and headed to class. I show up and walk into the classroom, and none of the people there were my usual classmates. I figured the room changed, as that would happen sometimes. I'm running around asking professors, and basically anyone I see if they know where my class is, and everyone is looking at me like I'm nuts, and no one has any idea where the class is. I end up getting back to my dorm and complaining to my friend. In typical college fashion, I threw in the towel real quick and smoked some substances. I look at the clock and realized that I had showed up to class an hour early. I am now really high, and even if I ran back to class, at this point, I would be late to the midterm and not allowed into the class. I ended up telling my professor, leaving out the weed part, naturally, and she said she had never heard this excuse before, so I could still take the exam. Whoops. Story 27. I taught English as a second language, ESL, in South Korea. I lived in a studio apartment in an apartment building, and 4 other ESL teachers at my school lived in the same building. The school provided our apartments. The apartments had steel front doors with locking metal handles. One morning when I was getting ready to leave for school, I couldn't open the door. So I called my friend coworker who lived in the apartment next to mine and had my backup key. I asked her to unlock my door from the outside because I was stuck. She walked out of her apartment and said, you don't have a door handle. Then she realized she had heard a loud banging noise in the middle of the night. Someone had tried to break into my apartment in the middle of the night by pounding on the handle. They broke the handle off the door. So I had to call my director and tell him I couldn't come into work because I was stuck in my apartment. He made me climb out my balcony and jump down from the second floor onto a parked car so that I could still come to class. It took me a while to do this, so I was late to my first class. I told my kindergartners I was late because I got locked in my apartment. They thought that was crazy. Story 28. My dad is a primary school psychologist. One day he said he would be home late because a preschooler didn't burn a house down. When he got home, it was actually a tragic story. A 5-year-old had a habit of playing with matches and his house burnt down. The day after, the fireman looked and said, "Yup, definitely an electrical fault." From the location, I'd say it was the toaster. Unfortunately, before this could happen, the kid's older brothers had come up with the theory. His playing with matches was how the fire started, and the 5-year-old decided it was true. He could not be dissuaded. It wasn't true. His conviction he was responsible for the family losing their house and possessions was so unshakable he had such a bad mental breakdown, he needed emergency hospitalization at the nearest mental health facility. My dad went with them to facilitate the admission, give all the relevant information, and provide moral support to distraught parents. He was very late home that night. Story 29. Kid broke his arm and told me it was at the beach. I didn't believe him, but then his mother showed me the video, and it was him drunk at a party, jumping off a building at the beach. Classic. Story 30. I used to be late to school almost every day. After a while, a teacher I actually respected sat me down and we had a long talk about how it had to end. I agreed and wanted to be better. The next day, I got up really early to try and start my new routine. Too early. So I went out to sit on the deck in the sun for a bit before I had to leave. When I went to go back inside, I somehow startled a squirrel into my house and had to spend an hour trying to get it to leave, which made me exactly as late as I usually was for school. My teacher believed me, but I think it was only because I couldn't get through the whole story without laughing about how absurd it was and told her. She was well within her rights to punish me for being an idiot, and if it made her feel any better, I was going to get in trouble with my mom for leaving squirrel crap all over the kitchen. Story 31. I promised a friend I would come see his band play at a concert. On my way to work that morning, I was nailed by an oncoming car while driving my motorcycle. I was probably going about 40 miles per hour, and they were going approximately 30 or 35-ish. Right before we collided, I was able to squeak out one of those mouse farts you call a motorcycle horn, but it was too late. I did a somersault over the car, hit the pavement, and slid for a bit. I got up immediately after being hit and screamed at the driver who hit me, while they drove off saying they would pull off and that they were sorry. There's a bit more to the story, but I'll cut to the chase. Later that night, I was face planted into the couch on all kinds of painkillers and muscle relaxers when my then fiance called my buddy and let him know I couldn't come to the concert because I'd been hit by a car. His response, "Most legit excuse ever, get well's an engineer." Story 32. It happened to me. The cat pooped on my homework. This was in the 90s when things were still handwritten. I had to rewrite my English essay before 6th form English in period 1. Story 33. I was late to work one day because I was locked in my house. We lived in a shanty house right off of campus in college, the kind of house that screws the windows shut on the first floor. Well, I woke up one morning to go and could not open our front door to save my life. The lock was jammed and I freaked out, so I woke up my roommate. I was like, "Dude, you're not going to believe me, but I can get out the front door. Can you help me?" So we begin to try to get the door open and cannot figure it out. I suggest to just jump out of the window, but sure enough, all of the windows were screwed shut. We tried to unscrew them, but without a power drill. It was impossible. I had to resort to climbing out a second-story window and jumping down from the balcony. Imagine telling your boss that you were locked inside your house. Story 34. Had an employee at work that was always late or had some excuse to leave early. So, at this point, everything he said had to be taken with a pinch of salt. Guy shows up to work late and says a springbuck came out of nowhere and smashed into his truck. Yeah, sure. Cue eye rolling. He then takes me by the hand to his truck. On the back is the corpse of his strolling venison friend. Story 35. People I tell today don't believe me, but it's 100% true. In 7th grade, in between classes, I rushed for a quick bathroom break with the 4 minutes I had. After flushing the toilet, the pipe broke and water violently sprayed everywhere. Trying to rush out of the stall in a frenzy, the door lock got stuck. I then crawled underneath and made it out on the other side, soaked. I went to a private school and wore uniforms, so I only had my PE clothes to change into. Imagine a 5 feet 0 inches 75 pounds girl in men's blue basketball shorts and shirt. Embarrassing at 12 years old when you care about what everyone thinks. Finally walked into class 15 minutes late, and everyone knew exactly what happened. My science teacher started cracking up along with the rest of the class. It was hilarious, but mortifying, especially because my crush was in that class. Of course, no explanation was needed to be done for being late. No secrets were safe at that school. Still makes me crack up to this day. Story 36. Teacher was taking ages to get our science projects back in 9th grade. Only half the class turned them in, and he was usually quite prompt, returning things within about 2 weeks. After a month, the class gets suspicious and finally someone asks. The teacher looks really embarrassed and goes, "So I took the projects home to grade. I stopped at the grocery store and my car was stolen." The list of who had and had not submitted was in his laptop bag, which he took into the store with him. So everyone whose project was stolen got an A. He let everyone who was late submit their projects with the understanding that the max grade he would give would be a B. Story 37. On my way to a first date, to the girl who will hopefully be my fiancé this coming Saturday. I got stuck behind an Amish carriage and was conceptually an hour late to our first date. It wasn't till 5 dates later she came to my town and ran into one making her late too. It was at this time she realized that I wasn't lying, and she sent a snap to her friends that I was indeed not lying like they all thought I was. We both have yet to see an AmSci carriage ever again on that ride. Story 38. Didn't happen to me, but my college roommate asked a girl out and had a date plan. She called an hour or so beforehand to say that she would either be really late or not make it because she burned her kitchen down. He assumed that she was just flaking on the date, so he tells her if she doesn't want to go out with him, just say so, and that she didn't have to make up a story to get out of it. She actually did set fire to her kitchen, attempting to bake cookies to bring as a gift for us both, and the fire department had to be called to put it out. 15 years later, they are still married. Story 39. My friend called me up and told me she had to cancel our shopping trip due to police interrogation after a murder in her apartment complex in a very well-off neighborhood, mostly filled with old couples and families. I thought she was kidding. Turns out her neighbor, a sweet middle-aged lady they sometimes had coffee with, decided to murder her millionaire husband for his inheritance after finding out he cheated on her and was planning a divorce. She spiked his drink and stuffed his body in a car trunk where he was found some weeks later, during which time she acted like a concerned widow. It was all on the news. My friend's building was encircled by police, and everyone in it was interrogated. Needless to say, we postponed our shopping trip for another day. Story 40. Other way around. When I was 16, I was riding my bicycle to an interview at McDonald's. I ended up getting hit by a truck. When I woke up in the hospital after a bit and actually realizing what happened and putting together, I asked the nurse what time it was. I realized I was over 45 minutes late to my interview and that I wasn't going to make it. I asked if we could call them, which they let me. So I called McDonald's, apologized, and said, "I got hit on my bike." She asked if I was all right and rescheduled the interview. When I went in, I took the small newspaper article about the accident in with me, just in case I had to prove it. As a kicker, she totally thought that when I said bike, I meant motorcycle, and actually laughed when I said Schwinn in response to, "What kind of bike do you ride?" Story 41. When I was a manager, an employee called in to tell me she was going to be late because she had ants in her pants. That was so creative. I told her that I'd accept the excuse, even if it was complete bullcrap. Turns out, she'd done laundry the night before and left all the clean clothes in a laundry basket on the floor. At some point, ants got into the apartment and were crawling around all through her clean laundry. She wasn't aware of the ant invasion, just got dressed and headed off to work. And halfway there, she claims, the ants started biting her. We have fire ants here that bite and are awful duckers. And she almost wrecked her car, turned around to redo the laundry, and finally showed up around midday. I mean, even if it was a total lie and she was just hungover or whatever, I gave her points for originality. Story 42. I was late to one of my first shifts at a new job for a very strange morning. My parents had gone on holiday, leaving me home alone for 2 weeks. That's fair enough. It's March and I'm in sixth form, so I can't go with them. The kitchen drain starts leaking and not knowing what to do. I ask a neighbor for help. He comes and helps stem the flow. By this time, I can't walk to work because the drain had taken so long, so the neighbor offers to give me a lift. However, my neighbor's next-door neighbor stops him and says his chickens had escaped into their garden and he had to get them. So I helped him grab them and put them back into their cages. At the very least, I had an interesting story to tell people at work. Story 43. One of my coworker was really late. We were working at a cafeteria restaurant and we were supposed to be 2 on the post to get everything ready by 11 a.m. So I got really pissed off because she wouldn't answer her phone. When my manager called her, an hour and a half after she was supposed to be here, she finally called and told us that on the highway she was behind a truck who carried watermelons and cantaloupes, and the back of the truck broke off, and thousands of watermelons and cantaloupes fell on the road, just in the portion where there was no signal for phones. My manager called bullcrap, but she came in with videos and pictures, and all you could see was a car stuck in a sea of exploded watermelons. Took them 3 hours to clean up a path for cars to go through. Truck was in the middle, blocking the 3 lanes. Story 44. This is an absurd excuse I gave for not coming into work. About 7 years ago, so I'm a huge Guild Wars fan. I've pre-ordered every limited edition box, everything they offer. Guild Wars 2 was going live this one particular day in the morning, although I did play the sneak peeks. But the morning it goes live, I get ready to go to work, get in my car, and there's a 2-foot wide trench excavated in the street directly past my driveway, which went down the street. The city was replacing sewer lines. I took a pic of the trench with my car on it and texted my boss, and he was cool with it. I got to play Guild Wars 2 all day on launch day. It was glorious. Story 45. Sorry, I slipped on some yogurt on the highway and scratched the car on the guardrail. So my friends were supposed to come over to a BBQ and bonfire at my place. We had a bunch of people coming over and they were supposed to come over and help out. They were hours late. At least they called and told me that they were going to be late, but they gave me that excuse. Pretty hard to believe, right? Well, when they finally arrived, they had pictures, and we could all see the scratches on the fender. As it happened, a truck rolled over on the highway ahead of them. The truck spilled its load of yogurt, and as they drove through the mess of it, their car slid a bit and he sideswiped the concrete barrier. They had to wait until police cleared them to leave the scene. Story 46. I was late because I had to take a crap. I have stomach problems, so when I have to go, I go, and it might take a while. I only live a mile away, 4-minute drive, so I didn't bother to call because by the time I got to the last intersection is when they'd likely be picking up the phone, and I certainly wasn't going to be calling from the toilet. Story 47. Got a phone call out from a coworker because as he was riding his motorcycle to work, a turkey flew into him and broke his nose. He had to go to the hospital to get his nose set, then defeather the turkey. We all thought he was full of crap and trying to prank us until he sent us pictures. This turkey really flew into the poor dude on his way to work. He now wears a closed face helmet. Story 48. A coworker from a job 20 years ago once came in a couple hours late. This guy was never late, never missed a day of work, never even came back late from lunch. But he was late that day because as he was starting up his car behind his house, he saw some random guy walking down the back lane get grabbed by a bunch of dudes and thrown into the back of a van, and then the van squealed away all Hollywood style. He apparently followed the van for a few blocks while on the phone to the police, and then he had to make a statement. We never did find out what the story was with this guy, but apparently when you see a guy getting thrown into a van, it's a valid excuse for being late. Story 49. There are tanks. We had a big mandatory meeting for all faculty in the late summer to prepare for the new school year. One professor called and said he had to miss it, which would mean he couldn't teach that fall, but asked for a special exception because there are tanks. He was traveling in Thailand and they had a bit of a revolution. There were, in fact, tanks roaming the streets and the airport was shut by the military. Yeah, that's a good enough reason to miss the workshop. Story 50. A colleague of mine lives in a very affluent neighborhood with a gate to the community. Well, he calls in saying someone stole his wheels off his car and put his car on blocks. We all laughed and said, "Sure, get your ass here." He sent a picture to our group chat, and sure enough, he was stuck. Then about 4 hours later, he sends another message and asks if we can let him borrow a car or carpool to work for a while. Turns out, he drives a IPLG 37 or something rather. which has special wheels. The tow truck company brought out 20 spare wheels, and none would fit. So he has to leave his car in the driveway and order new rims, get tires mounted, and then install them later. Story 51. I went to boarding school, and in my first week we had some fog. Not really dense fog, but enough that you could only see 50 meters. I rocked up 55 minutes late to an 80-minute lesson, strolled in laughing, saying, "Sorry, I'm late, I got lost in the fog," and proceeded to get berated the head of science, whilst my nonchalant teacher sat there not caring. I genuinely did. It was a huge school and a 10-minute walk from my boarding house to the science block. Going through all the main academic concourse, walked past history about 5 times. Story 52. My high school had an agriculture department that raised small animals each year, pigs and lambs mostly, but the occasional cow. It wasn't uncommon for a student to come to class smelling a bit gamey. One day a guy strolls into class about a half hour late, smelling a bit gamier than usual, claims his pig crap. Its intestines out and they had to sew them back in. This sounded like utter bullcrap to me. Teacher asked the dude a few questions about how they rectified it as a pop quiz type lie detector. Dude got them all right and she sent him to the gym to take a shower. Apparently farm animals get prolapses. So my pig crap his intestines out is a valid excuse for being late to class. Story 53. It was me. I had to call in late because a badger had taken up residence under my car and would start hissing whenever I got close. I ended up taking pictures and showing my boss. Story 54. My dog wouldn't poop. Walked around and around the neighborhood. Took her to her favorite spots. A few unfamiliar ones too. If I don't walk her till she poops before I leave, she'll poop in the house. Sorry. Story 55. My teacher didn't believe me that I was late for school because of an emu being chased by a man on a four-wheeler with a lasso. However, since 4 different teachers heard the same story from myself, my sister and my 2 cousins, they looked into it and found a local farmer with emus. They called him and he confirmed one had escaped that morning and they caught it on my property. Story 56. I was locked inside my house and had to miss classes. I lived in a typical college apartment with random doors everywhere and rooms made where you can tell they weren't meant to be. I had an old school door in my bedroom. The door handle broke. The whole mechanism just came apart in my hand, and all I had was the rod that sticks in the door fell out on the other side of the door. I was stranded inside my own bedroom without my phone or a way to contact anyone. The only option I had was breaking the door, but I didn't want to lose my security deposit, so I just waited for my roommate to come home after her class. I don't think my professors believed my excuse. Story 57. On my way to meet a friend at his bonfire, I found a dog in the middle of the road. It was a bred husky with a broken tether on the collar. Unsure what to do, I took a rope I keep in my car for emergencies, cut it down, and used it as a leash to make sure the big fella didn't run off into traffic. Ended up calling my friend to let him know I found dog. He said bring him, and that is how a bunch of us got to chill with a dog at a bonfire. Turns out my friend knew the owner just by calling around to people in the area. Hour later, the owner shows up to the fire and collects his pup. Story 58. I had to call my manager to let him know I would be late. I was letting my neighbor's dogs out at the last minute before I had to go to work. Her dogs are usually really good about not pooping in the house, so I thought I had the luxury of not checking for dog crap underfoot as I walked through the house. But I stepped in a huge pile of this dog's poop, which smeared it across the rug it was on. There were 2 potential managers working that day, and I knew one would not believe me, but the other would. Luckily, it was the nicer manager at the time, because he just started laughing at me and didn't care that I would be late from it. Story 59. Sure. A truck flipped over and dumped 27 tons of cabbages on the freeway, and you got stuck for 4 hours while they dug it out. Oh wait. Story 60. One of my roommates adjusted her alarm clock the wrong way for daylight savings time, backwards instead of forwards, and was about 2 hours late for work. For context, we were in the Air Force, lived in Fort Collins in northern Colorado, and commuted 45 minutes through a whole lot of nothingness to our base in Cheyenne, Wyoming. This happened in the winter, when the interstate between FOCO, Cheyenne would often get icy overnight. At the point where my roommate finally arrived for work, our squadron commander was getting ready to go look for her crashed in a ditch somewhere off I-25. She didn't even get in trouble, because our commander was just relieved she was safe. Story 61. I was late to school one day, and when my teacher asked why, I cited traffic on the M25 motorway. In full, my mom had gone to slap me on Monday morning, and I defended myself. She got so mad about it, she called my dad and told him to let me stay at his house for the rest of the week. He lives 31 miles away from my school, and so to get there, we had to take the motorway. Unfortunately, there was a car crash that morning, and I ended up a few minutes late. Teacher didn't believe me, refused to call either one of my parents to verify, and I for detention anyway. Duck you, Mr. Gray. Story 62. Leaves on the train line. It happened to me. I refused to accept this. But the guy at the station said, "Pop in over the weekend. I'll show you." I did turn up over the weekend. He was so not expecting me to. And yes, leaves on the line can cause delays to trains as they get squashed and some fluid comes out. That crap is slippery as duck, and the next trains coming along the line start to not be able to brake and just skid along the track. Amazing. Story 63. I told my manager I had to take my cysts to the hospital for a sword wound. They thought I was being a smartass. I was gifted a prop sword and she went to put it back in the sheath, missed, and put it through the skin on the back of her hand. Take caution when you sheathe your weapons, kids. Story 64. I was late to practice, was a college athlete one morning, because my car had a flat tire. Thing was, I lived with a bunch of my teammates. Coach asked why we didn't take someone else's car. Coach didn't believe us when we said we all had flat tires. Apparently during the night, some asshat decided it would be funny to put a nail through all of the left tires of everyone on the street. We didn't have a garage, so we were all screwed. And this evil genius did it to 2 tires on every car. We couldn't just use a spare and go. Story 65. I was dating a guy who told me 2 days before our second date, his grandpa died that morning and he had to be with his family for dinner Friday. He was sorry to cancel at the last minute. I was like, yeah, okay. Mom wanted to meet up somewhere to meet me for the first time, and we agree on a time. I'm going down my middle of nowhere back road, and I get pulled over. Cop asks me to pull in a random driveway because they're bringing a house through. Because of the elevation of the hill, it took a solid 30 minutes for this truck to bring a house up both lanes of the road. Story 67. I'm a truck driver. Years ago, a colleague calls the dispatch. Hear how the conversation went. Driver. I'm gonna be late for my delivery. I got hit by a plane on the highway. Dispatch. Good one. Seriously, what's going on? Driver. No, I really got hit by a plane. Dispatch. Seriously, tell me what's your problem. Driver. I already told you. There's a small airport where a Cessna took off with a near-empty tank, then crashed directly in front of the runway, where the highway is, and the wing clipped with the rear of our trailer. You don't hear that every day. Story 68. Me? Yay! After that turtle comment, it came back to me. One day, as usual, I was racing to get kids dropped off and to work on time when I came across a long line of cars coming the other way and a baby skunk with a bottle on its head running around in circles. Come on, people! I need to get to work! So I stopped and grabbed my wetsuit and set that sucker free and headed to work. Except I got sprayed and got sent home. I love the smell, so it was great in my book. Story 69. I told my band teacher I was late because a piece of my driver's side door fell in the road. She didn't believe me until she saw me with my door barely hanging on, tied to my other doors with a jump rope I found. Story 70. I once had to cancel a therapy appointment because my father unwittingly set an acre of our woods on fire. Just sent my therapist a completely nonchalant, "Hey, my dad's an idiot, and our stuff is on fire, so it'll need to reschedule." No houses, people, or animals were harmed. Probably the most exciting day our local fire department had in a while. Tbeach. And we have since banned Dad from burning things in the woods, and Def make fun of him for it constantly. Story 71. Before cell phones were in mass usage, I worked very briefly as a window washer. A co-worker and I were going to wash all the windows for an HOA neighborhood. He never showed. Turns out, someone had put a rubber snake in his truck, and it scared him. He wouldn't go near the truck. Animal control was called, and they howled with laughter when they took out the snake. Everyone had a great time except for me, who had to wash an entire neighborhood's worth of windows by myself. Story 72. This one was me. Third year of college, I told an instructor I needed to miss a class because my father had passed away and the funeral was that day. Before the next class, I called her and told her that. I also needed to miss the following class because my grandmother had a massive heart attack and had passed away a few hours after the funeral. She didn't believe me until I brought in the obituaries, at which point she was very apologetic. I wasn't mad, I wouldn't have believed it either.